Hi, this is Rebecca Kroll, co-author of Cold Wax Medium, Techniques, Concepts, and Conversations, and co-producer of Cold Wax Medium, a video workshop. Welcome to Ask Jerry and Rebecca, a video series answering all your questions about cold wax medium. Hello. Today's questions, there are two of them, involve the solvent reduction technique that Jerry and I teach in our workshops, our book, and our video. And there were two different people that asked about this. Lucy Michelle asked about some tips to make this work better and keep those marks from being muddy so they could be clear and crisp. And Jill asked about the difference between the different solvents that we can use for this technique. So this is a technique that I myself use constantly in my work throughout all the layers, and it shows up on the surface, but it's also something I do throughout the whole process. And because I really like the idea of bringing those underlying layers into the conversation. So often we're covering up. But this is a way to reveal those layers and the history that's built up underneath the top layer. It is kind of a tricky technique. It's a little bit hard to describe in words, but this particular format isn't great for actually demoing anything, so I'll just give you some tips and things. And when it works well, you get such beautiful, crisp lines and shapes of contrasting color. And it is somewhat tricky, though. Sometimes it doesn't work very well. I'm going to show you here an older painting of mine where the effects are quite dramatic. So you can see the black area here is the top layer. And what's coming through underneath there, the oranges and yellows, that's where the solvent has been applied and then pulled back to reveal those underlying layers. And you can see the amount of contrast I've used to make this very effective. And also, there are things I'm going to mention in a second about how the way that you build up these layers can help. So what you start with, what that orange layer would have been, is a tacky layer. And so you got your surface that you want to apply this technique to. Your top layer is semi-dry. And that's important because when the solvent comes through the upper layer, we want that tacky surface to grip the solvent, to keep it from running all over the place. If you're trying to do this on a very dry surface, that's what the solvent will do. It tends to just run around and be uncontrollable. And if it's a very wet surface, basically you're dumping solvent on a wet surface and you're going to get mud. So it is important that what you have underneath, or what you're starting with, actually, that's a tacky surface. And then you're going to apply over that a thin layer of a contrasting color. And it is important that it's fairly thin. And if you feel like you've put too much paint down, and I usually do it with either a brayer or a squeegee, you can blot some of that up with a piece of tissue paper and a brayer. So you're aiming for a thin layer, an even layer. The other thing about the surface that you're working on is it should be not highly physically textured. You can have visual texture and lots of stuff going on, but if you have a physical bumpy texture, again, it's going to be hard to control the solvent. It will tend to go places that you weren't really thinking of, or just run all over the place. So kind of a smooth surface, and in my own work that happens because I do a lot of compressing and pushing down my layers to create a visual texture. My work actually isn't highly physically textured, and that's probably why this technique works for me often. So after you've put down this top layer and made sure that it's fairly thin, that's when you come in with the solvent. So as to the question of the type of solvent, odorless mineral spirits, Gamsol, is kind of the go-to everyday kind of use, and it is usually sufficient to reveal whatever's right underneath your wet layer. And if you do want to go deeper, or you're having trouble getting this to work, you could try one of the citrus-based solvents like Citrusol or D-limonene. And those are just more heavy duty. So They're also kind of smelly and more expensive, and you probably want to start with Gamsol and see if that works for you. So you apply the solvent. There's lots of ways to do this. I think with this painting that I just showed you, these would have been just brush marks across the surface. You can drip, you can splatter, you can make little puddles and pools. Sometimes when I want to pick out a specific shape, I will use a brush and just paint that shape on with solvent. As far as how long you leave the solvent on there before removing it, because that's the next step, you can experiment with that, see what works. If you do it the first time and you're not really getting a clear mark, you might want to just leave it on longer. Or usually it doesn't really take very long. Like pretty much I put it down and then I'm reaching for my squeegee, which is what I typically use to remove the solvent. Sometimes I leave it on longer if it's something, if I want a different effect. I want it to cut down deeper. So the solvent is working on that top layer to remove it, and it's being caught and held by the tacky second layer. Ideally, when you take your squeegee and remove the solvent, you're going to get a nice clean area, clean mark. How do you do that? How do you remove it? Squeegees are great. I don't really use anything else myself, and it should be something with a nice flat silicone blade on it. So you're going to just put that solvent down and take the squeegee in your hand and just pull it across in a smooth, quick move. One stroke should do it. I keep a paper towel in my other hand so that if I do need to make another pass with the squeegee to get all the solvent off, I have that paper towel handy to remove this kind of sludge that I'm going to get on the edge of the squeegee. The other way to remove the solvent is to blot it up with something like paper towel, and this creates usually a softer edge. So when the solvent is down, you just put the paper towel down and run over the back of it with your hand or a brayer and lift it up. And either of those work. They have different effects to them. So these are the basic steps. And as I said, it can be a bit tricky. So don't be discouraged if you try this and it doesn't work. It's the kind of thing that sometimes it works when you least expect it to, and other times it doesn't work, even though it seems like you have everything in place. As you build up your layers of the painting, keep trying this and keep experimenting and playing around with it. Sometimes when you have multiple layers of these types of marks, creates a very interesting visual texture because you're getting glimpses of layers far beneath the surface. So I hope that helps. Try it for yourself, and thanks for listening.